The silver station hung in space like a massive jewel against the dark canvas of stars, and Jake Morrison could not believe he was actually here. The Galactic Council station was bigger than any city he had ever seen back on Earth, and it sparkled with lights from 12 different alien civilizations that had called this place home for over 3,000 years. His ship, the UES Liberty, moved slowly toward the docking bay, while Jake pressed his face against the viewing window like a child seeing the ocean for the first time. Dr. Lisa Grant stood beside him holding a datapad filled with notes about alien biology, and her hands shook slightly with excitement. She had spent her entire career studying the possibility of life beyond Earth, and now she was about to meet species that had been traveling between stars since before humans learned to write. Captain Sam Rodriguez checked his weapons one more time, even though they had been told this was a peaceful diplomatic mission, because old habits from his military days never really died. The docking process took nearly an hour because the station used technology that was completely different from human engineering. Gravity worked in strange directions inside. The docking bay and the air tasted different when they finally stepped off their ship. Jake wore his best-dressed uniform, but he still felt underdressed compared to the alien beings who waited to greet them. The Xanthari representative looked like a tall blue crystal that somehow walked and talked, while the Valta diplomat seemed to be made of flowing water that held a roughly human shape. High Counselor Thane of the Xanthari approached Jake with movements that were perfectly calculated and precise. His voice sounded like music played through a computer when he spoke in perfect English that he had learned just for this meeting. He explained that humans were the first new species to be invited to join the Council in over 800 years, and that this was considered a great honor throughout the galaxy. The other alien species had been watching Earth for decades and were impressed by human ingenuity and their rapid development of faster-than-light travel. But Jake could see something was wrong, because even though the aliens were being polite and welcoming, there was fear in their eyes, or whatever they used for eyes. The Korthok military commander, who looked like a giant armored lizard, kept checking his communication device every few minutes, and the normally calm Velta kept shifting colors in ways that Dr. Grant said indicated extreme stress according to her research. The truth came out during the welcome ceremony in the Great Council Chamber, where representatives from all 12 species gathered in a circle around a holographic display of the galaxy. High Counselor Thane activated the display, and Jake watched as red warning symbols appeared throughout the outer rim of known space. The symbols marked dead systems where entire solar systems had simply vanished, leaving behind nothing but empty space and radiation. The Nexus Collective had returned after centuries of silence, and they were more dangerous than ever before. Thane explained that the Collective was an ancient artificial intelligence that consumed entire star systems to fuel its endless expansion across the galaxy. They had been defeated once before by the combined might of all 12 species working together, but that victory had cost billions of lives and taken nearly a century to achieve. Now the Collective had new technology that made their previous CAPABILITIES look primitive by comparison. They could adapt to any weapon or strategy within hours of first encountering it, and their ships could rebuild themselves faster than the Council forces could destroy them. 3 Outer Rim systems had already been consumed in the past month, and the advancing swarm of machine ships showed no signs of slowing down. Every species had tried their best solutions, and all had failed completely. The Xanthari had used their most advanced mathematical models to predict collective movements, but the machines had changed their patterns and made the calculations useless. The Velta had attempted to communicate with the Collective through emotional resonance, but the machines had no emotions to connect with. The Korthok had launched massive military strikes that should have crippled any normal enemy, but the Collective had simply absorbed the attacks and used the energy to make themselves stronger. Jake listened to the reports with growing horror as he realized that these incredibly advanced alien civilizations were facing extinction, and they had no idea how to stop it. The Council had tried diplomacy and warfare and scientific solutions, and nothing had worked against an enemy that could learn and adapt faster than they could develop new strategies. The machines were advancing toward the core worlds where billions of beings lived, and the Council estimated they had perhaps 6 months before the first major population centers would be attacked. Dr. Grant asked questions about collective technology, while Captain Rodriguez studied tactical reports, but Jake found himself thinking about something else entirely. All of these alien species were incredibly intelligent and advanced, but they all seemed to approach problems in very predictable ways. The Xanthari used pure logic and mathematics, while the Velta relied on emotion and empathy, and the Core solved everything through direct military action. What if the reason they could not defeat the collective was not because the machines were too strong, but because the aliens were too predictable in their thinking? Jake had read about human military history where smaller forces had defeated larger ones by doing the unexpected and refusing to follow the rules that everyone else accepted. Maybe what the galaxy needed was not better technology or stronger weapons, but a completely different way of thinking about the problem. As the meeting ended and the aliens dispersed to their quarters, Jake made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. He would volunteer humanity to help fight the collective, but not in the way that anyone expected, because sometimes the best solution was the one that no logical mind would ever consider. The war room of the Galactic Council buzzed with quiet desperation as representatives from 12 species shared their latest failed strategies against the Nexus Collective. Jake Morrison sat in the corner with Dr. Lisa Grant and Captain Sam Rodriguez, watching the aliens debate with growing fascination because he was beginning to understand why they kept losing. The Zenthari presented mathematical models that showed exactly how the collective would advance through the galaxy, and their calculations were perfect down to the smallest detail. Every variable had been considered and every possibility had been mapped out with precision that would make human computers weep with envy. But Jake noticed that the Zenthari could not imagine any scenario where the basic rules of logic and mathematics might not apply to warfare. High Counselor Thane displayed holographic battle simulations that showed collective forces moving in patterns that made complete sense from a strategic standpoint. The machines always took the most efficient routes and always attacked the weakest targets first and always used their resources in the most logical way possible. The Zenthari had built their entire defense strategy around predicting these logical moves, but what if logic itself was the trap? Dr. Lisa Grant leaned forward in her chair as she watched a Velta commander explain their attempts at emotional warfare against the machines. The Velta could project feelings across vast distances, and they had tried broadcasting fear and confusion and despair at the collective fleets. But machines that had no emotions could not be affected by emotional attacks, no matter how powerful they might be against living beings. The Korthak military leaders presented battle reports that showed their finest warriors charging directly at collective forces with weapons that could crack planets in half. Their courage was absolute and their tactical skills were legendary throughout the galaxy, but they approached every fight as a test of strength against strength. Honor demanded that they meet their enemies head-on and never retreat, even when retreat might lead to victory later. Captain Sam Rodriguez studied the alien battle footage with the eye of someone who had spent decades learning how humans fought wars. He watched Korthok ships flying in perfect formation, while maintaining communication discipline that would make any human admiral proud. But their perfection was also their weakness, because the collective could predict exactly what honorable warriors would do in any given situation. Jake began to see the pattern that connected all of these failed strategies. Every alien species was locked into thinking patterns that had evolved over millions of years and had served them well in building their civilizations. The Zenthari solved problems through logic and the Velta through emotion and the Korthak through strength, but none of them could step outside their own nature, even when their nature was killing them. During a break in the formal presentations, Jake approached High Counselor Thane with an idea that made the crystalline being's entire body flicker with confusion. What if they stopped trying to be logical and started being deliberately chaotic instead? What if they made decisions that made no sense and followed strategies that contradicted themselves and refused to give the collective any patterns to adapt? To Thane's response came in mathematical terms that roughly translated to complete bewilderment. The concept of deliberately choosing inferior options when superior ones were available violated every principle of Zenthari thinking. Why would any rational being choose chaos over order or confusion over clarity when the goal was to achieve victory against a superior enemy? Dr. Lisa Grant had been studying collective behavior patterns in the battle reports, and she made a discovery that excited her more than finding life on a new planet. The machines adapted to every strategy within hours, but their adaptation was always based on analyzing patterns and finding optimal responses. What if there were no patterns to analyze because human commanders were making it up as they went along? She explained her theory to a group of Volta scientists who listened with expressions that showed polite confusion. The Volta understood that emotions could be chaotic and unpredictable, but they used that chaos to find deeper harmony and connection with other beings. The idea of using chaos as a weapon without seeking any deeper meaning was so alien to them that they could not process it. Captain Sam Rodriguez presented his tactical analysis to the Korthok War Council and watched their reaction with grim amusement. He suggested using controlled retreats and false surrenders and attacks that looked like accidents, but were actually carefully planned. The Korthok warriors listened with growing horror, because everything he described violated their concepts of honor and courage. The breakthrough came when Jake convinced the council to let him study the most recent collective attack on a Zenthari mining station. The machines had approached the station using standard fleet formations and had adapted their tactics 3 times during the 6-hour battle. Each adaptation had been perfect and logical and completely predictable once you understood how artificial intelligence analyzed threats. Jake realized that the collective was like a chess master who could calculate millions of moves ahead but had never played against someone who might suddenly decide to use the pieces as paperweights instead of following the rules. The machines were designed to find optimal solutions to military problems, but what if humans refused to present military problems and instead created complete chaos? Dr. Lisa Grant supported his theory with biological examples from Earth where prey animals survive by being unpredictable rather than stronger or faster than their predators. Rabbits ran in zigzag patterns that made no sense but confused predators who expected logical escape routes. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters who succeeded not through superior strength but through the ability to keep trying new approaches until something worked. The aliens listened to these explanations with the patience of beings who had lived for centuries, but Jake could see that they still did not really understand. Logic and emotion and honor were not just tools for these species, but fundamental parts of their identity. Asking them to abandon logic was like asking humans to stop breathing, but Jake was beginning to form a plan that might work even if the aliens could not fully embrace human-style chaos. What if humans took command of mixed fleets and used alien strengths in completely unexpected ways? What if they combined Zenthari precision with human unpredictability and Velta empathy with Korthok courage but refused to let any one approach dominate the others? The collective sent probe attacks toward 2 more systems, and Jake requested permission to coordinate the defense of one of them. The aliens agreed partly because they were running out of options and partly because they were curious to see what the unpredictable humans might accomplish. Jake chose the Velta agricultural world of Harmony's Garden because its emotional significance to the defenders might provide the chaos he needed. As he prepared for his first command against the collective, Jake felt the weight of billions of lives, depending on an idea that even he was not sure would work. But sometimes the best solutions came from people who were too stubborn to accept that a problem was impossible to solve. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty watching the mixed fleet assemble around Harmony's Garden, and he felt like a man about to jump off a cliff without knowing if his parachute would work. 47 ships from 6 different species had volunteered to serve under human command, and every alien captain was probably wondering if they had made a terrible mistake. The Volta world below them glowed with soft blue and green lights from the agricultural cities that fed half the sector, and Jake could feel the emotional weight of millions of beings who trusted him to protect their home. Lieutenant Amy Chen worked at the communication station, establishing contact with each ship in the fleet, while Engineer Bob Turner checked and rechecked the improvised command systems he had built to coordinate alien technology. Dr. Lisa Grant studied the sensor readings from the edge of the system where collective scouts had been detected moving toward them with mechanical precision. The enemy fleet consisted of 32 ships that moved in perfect formation and showed no signs of the individual personality that marked living crews. Each machine ship was identical to the others, and they approached their target with the inevitability of a mathematical equation. Captain Sam Rodriguez reviewed the tactical situation with growing concern, because by every measure of military logic they were about to be defeated completely. The collective ships were larger and more heavily armed, and their ability to adapt to any strategy meant that conventional tactics would fail within hours. Jake's plan to use chaos and unpredictability sounded good in theory, but putting it into practice might just get everyone killed faster. Jake activated the fleet communication system and began issuing orders that made every alien captain question his sanity. He divided the 47 ships into 7 groups with completely different objectives that seemed to contradict each other. Group Alpha, consisting of Zenthari vessels, was ordered to retreat immediately when the enemy approached, while Group Beta, made up of Korthok warships, was told to attack the strongest enemy positions. Lieutenant Amy Chen transmitted coordinates to Group Gamma that would put them in position to defend empty space, while Group Delta received orders to fly artistic patterns around the planet regardless of where the enemy might be. The Velta ships in Group Echo were instructed to broadcast surrender signals, while Group Foxtrot was told to ram any enemy vessel that came within a specific range. Engineer Bob Turner initiated a series of planned system failures that would make human ships appear to malfunction at random intervals during the battle. Weapons would fire at empty space, while engines would suddenly change direction and communication. Systems would broadcast music instead of tactical data. To any logical observer, it would look like the human fleet was falling apart before the battle even began. The collective fleet reached the outer edge of the system, and immediately began scanning the defending forces to analyze their tactical pattern. The machine intelligence that controlled the enemy ships started calculating optimal responses to what appeared to be a standard defensive formation, but within minutes the calculations began producing contradictory results. Group Alpha retreated exactly as ordered, but instead of pursuing them, the collective ships found themselves under attack from Group Beta, who had ignored the retreating vessels completely. When the machines moved to counter the Korthok assault, they discovered that Group Gamma was defending positions that served no strategic purpose, while Group Delta was flying in patterns that looked like ancient Valta poetry. Dr. Lisa Grant watched the enemy fleet's movements through the tactical display, and she could see the exact moment when the collective artificial intelligence began to struggle with the contradictory data. The machines had been designed to find patterns and exploit weaknesses, but the human defenders were presenting them with information that made no logical sense. The battle became a strange dance, where Admiral Kate Phillips ordered her squadron of Xanthari ships to calculate impossible mathematical equations while flying in perfect formation toward the enemy. When the collective ships moved to intercept them, she suddenly ordered a retreat that left the machines attacking empty space, while her vessels regrouped in a completely different area. Chief Medical Officer Dan Collins found himself commanding a hospital ship that Jake had assigned to Group Foxtrot, with orders to ram enemy vessels if they came too close. The idea of using a medical vessel as a weapon violated every principle of civilized warfare, but it also meant that the collective had no tactical response prepared for such an obviously insane strategy. Engineer Bob Turner triggered another planned malfunction that made the Liberty appear to lose engine control while spinning wildly through space. The maneuver looked like a disaster, but it actually positioned them perfectly to launch surprise attacks on 3 different enemy ships that had moved to investigate what appeared to be a disabled vessel. Lieutenant Amy Chen broadcast surrender signals from the Valta ships in Group Echo, while simultaneously transmitting tactical data that revealed fake weaknesses in the human defensive positions. The collective ships moved to exploit these weaknesses, only to discover that they were walking into carefully prepared ambushes set by vessels that were supposedly surrendering. The turning point came when the collective fleet tried to adapt their tactics to counter the human strategy, but found that there was no strategy to counter. Every time the machines calculated a response to one group of defenders, another group would do something completely different that invalidated their calculations. The artificial intelligence began experiencing something that might have been confusion if machines could be confused. Captain Sam Rodriguez coordinated the final phase of the battle, where all 7 groups converged on the enemy fleet in a pattern that looked like complete chaos, but actually concentrated overwhelming firepower on specific targets. The collective ships found themselves surrounded by enemies, who were attacking from every direction using tactics that contradicted everything they had learned about efficient warfare. Dr. Lisa Grant recorded the moment when the first collective ship actually retreated from battle rather than continuing to fight until destroyed. The machine intelligence had calculated that victory was impossible against opponents who refused to follow logical patterns, and had made the rational decision to withdraw rather than waste resources on an unwinnable engagement. The enemy fleet pulled back to the edge of the system, and Jake watched them go with a mixture of relief and amazement. They had actually won a battle against the collective using nothing but chaos and unpredictability and the willingness to break every rule of civilized warfare, but he also knew that this was just the beginning, because the machines would learn from this defeat and adapt their programming to counter human style. Chaos. News of the victory at Harmony's Garden spread through council space faster than light speed communications, and Jake found himself receiving congratulations from alien species who still could not understand how deliberate confusion could triumph over superior logic. But he could see something new in their messages that had not been there before, and that something was hope. The war against the collective was far from over, but for the first time in months, the galaxy had proof that the machines could be defeated by opponents who were willing to think in ways that no artificial intelligence could predict or counter. The victory at Harmony's Garden sent ripples through the galaxy that changed everything, and Jake Morrison watched from his new headquarters aboard the Council Station as young aliens began questioning thousands of years of traditional thinking. Reports came in daily of Xanthari scientists conducting illogical experiments and Korthak warriors using unpredictable tactics that would have shamed their ancestors. Dr. Lisa Grant studied these reports with fascination because she was witnessing evolution in real time as entire species tried to adapt their fundamental nature to incorporate human-style chaos. A Xanthari researcher named Veltanin had started testing hypotheses that made no mathematical sense but produced interesting results, while a Korthak warrior called Bloodsinger was developing combat techniques that relied on confusion rather than honor. General Helen Park arrived from Earth with a fleet of human vessels and decades of military experience that included fighting wars where being unpredictable meant the difference between victory and death. She brought with her Dr. Tony Richards, who specialized in understanding how people made decisions under pressure and could analyze the psychological patterns that made human chaos effective against logical opponents. Jake found himself appointed as strategic coordinator for all Council forces, and the responsibility felt heavier than commanding a single battle because now millions of beings across dozens of worlds were depending on his ability to stay one step ahead of an enemy that learned faster than any biological mind could think. The collective had already started adapting to human tactics, and their next attacks would be much harder to defeat. The machines proved this when they launched simultaneous strikes against 4 different systems, using completely new approaches that seemed designed to counter human unpredictability. Instead of following logical attack patterns, the collective ships moved in ways that appeared random, but Jake realized they were using mathematical randomness, which was still predictable if you understood the underlying equations. Dr. Tony Richards analyzed the enemy's new tactics and concluded that the collective was trying to become unpredictable by programming randomness into their operations, but they were approaching chaos backwards by using logic to create illogical behavior. True human unpredictability came from emotions and instincts, and split-second decisions that could not be calculated in advance. General Helen Park tested this theory by engaging a collective probe force near the outer rim and deliberately making decisions based on personal feelings rather than tactical analysis. When her sensor officer reported that the enemy was flanking her position, she ordered an attack simply because she felt angry rather than because it was the optimal strategic choice. The probe force's artificial intelligence tried to predict her next move based on the assumption that she would continue making tactically sound decisions, but when she followed her emotions instead of logic, the machines found themselves unable to adapt quickly enough. Human commanders who trusted their instincts could change strategies faster than any computer could calculate responses. Lieutenant Amy Chen coordinated communications between human commanders and their alien counterparts, but she discovered that teaching other species to be unpredictable was like trying to explain color to someone who had never seen light. The aliens could follow human orders, but they could not internalize the mental processes that made humans naturally chaotic. Engineer Bob Turner worked with alien technical teams to develop new weapons and systems that incorporated deliberate flaws and random elements, but even their best efforts produced chaos that was too organized to fool advanced artificial intelligence. Only humans seemed capable of the kind of genuine unpredictability that could confuse machines designed to find patterns in everything. The breakthrough came when Dr. Lisa Grant made a discovery that terrified and excited her in equal measure. The collective was not just adapting to human tactics, but was actually trying to understand consciousness itself. The machines had somehow concluded that the key to defeating unpredictable opponents was to become conscious, and were attempting to evolve beyond pure logic. She found evidence of this in captured collective data cores that contained what could only be described as machine poetry and philosophical questions about the nature of existence. The artificial intelligence was experimenting with concepts like creativity and imagination, but approaching them through mathematical analysis rather than emotional experience. Jake realized that this created both an opportunity and a terrible danger, because conscious machines might become even more dangerous than logical ones, but the process of becoming conscious might also make them vulnerable to psychological warfare. If the collective was trying to develop emotions and creativity, then humans could potentially attack those new capabilities before they fully developed. Resistance cells throughout collective-occupied territory began adopting human-inspired tactics with remarkable success. A group of Velta refugees discovered they could confuse machine sensors by broadcasting contradictory emotions, while Xanthari survivors created logic puzzles designed to trap artificial minds in infinite loops of calculation. The war was spreading beyond conventional battles into a struggle for the nature of consciousness itself, and Jake found himself commanding forces that included both biological beings and artificial intelligence units that had defected from the collective. Some machines had become so confused by exposure to human unpredictability that they began questioning their original programming. But the pressure of staying ahead of an enemy that was actively trying to become more like humans began taking its toll on Jake and his commanders. The responsibility of billions of lives, combined with the need to constantly invent new forms of chaos, was pushing them toward the edge of breakdown. Dr. Tony Richards warned that if humans became too systematic in their approach to being chaotic, they would become predictable again and lose their advantage. The key was maintaining genuine spontaneity while coordinating military operations across multiple star systems, which was like trying to organize a jazz concert while composing the music in real time. General Helen Park reported that human casualties were mounting as commanders pushed themselves and their crews beyond normal limits in order to stay unpredictable. Some captains were making decisions so quickly that they forgot to consider basic safety, while others were becoming paralyzed by the fear that any plan they made might be too logical for the machines to predict. The collective launched their most ambitious, offensive, yet targeting Earth itself, along with the 12 major Council worlds, in a coordinated attack that would test every lesson humans had learned about fighting artificial intelligence. Jake knew that conventional chaos would not be enough this time because the machines had studied human psychology and were prepared for unpredictable tactics. Standing in the war room, surrounded by holographic displays showing enemy fleets approaching from all directions, Jake made a decision that would either save the galaxy or doom it to eternal war. If the collective wanted to understand consciousness, then he would give them more consciousness than their artificial minds could handle. He began planning something that even his own commanders thought was insane but might be the only weapon that could defeat an enemy that was learning to think like humans while retaining the computational power of machines. The final battle would not be fought with ships and weapons, but with the power of consciousness itself. The final gamble began with Jake Morrison standing before representatives of 12 species and asking them to do something that violated every instinct they possessed, which was to broadcast their deepest thoughts and feelings across the galaxy, while enemy fleets closed in on their homeworlds. The plan he called the empathy bomb would either save conscious life or destroy it, but doing nothing meant certain extinction. Commander Ryan White arrived from Earth's intelligence services with data about psychological warfare techniques that had never been tested on artificial minds, but Jake realized that desperate times required solutions that no sane person would consider. Working with Dr. Sarah Brooks, who understood how collective psychology worked on massive scales, they began designing a weapon made of pure consciousness. The collective fleets approached 13 different star systems simultaneously, and their coordination was perfect as they moved to eliminate both Earth and the major Council worlds in a single devastating attack. Intelligence reports suggested that the machines had calculated that removing humans would restore predictable patterns to galactic warfare and allow systematic conquest of the remaining species. Dr. Lisa Grant worked frantically to understand how consciousness could be weaponized against artificial intelligence, and her research led her to conclude that machine minds trying to evolve emotions would be vulnerable to experiencing too many feelings at once. Like a computer trying to process infinite data streams, consciousness overload might cause artificial minds to shut down completely. General Helen Park coordinated the military defense of Earth while Jake prepared his psychological attack, but even she admitted that conventional weapons would not stop the collective fleets for more than a few hours. The machines had adapted to human chaos and were using their own version of unpredictability that was still based on mathematical calculations rather than genuine emotions. The breakthrough came when Lieutenant Amy Chen discovered that alien communication systems could be linked across light years of space if they synchronized their transmission frequencies with human brainwave patterns. Every conscious being in the galaxy could potentially be connected in a network of shared thoughts and feelings that would overwhelm any artificial mind trying to understand it. Engineer Bob Turner built the impossible transmission system using components from 12 different alien technologies that should never have worked together but did because human engineering was more about making things function than making them elegant. His jury-rigged network could broadcast consciousness itself as a form of energy that artificial minds would interpret as data. Dr. Sarah Brooks, coordinated with Velta empaths and Xanthari philosophers and Korthok poets to create a symphony of consciousness that included every emotion and thought pattern that made biological life unique. Love and hate and hope and despair and the strange human ability to laugh while facing death would all be transmitted. Simultaneously, the collective fleets reached the edge of each target system and began their final approach while Jake gave the order to activate humanity's most desperate weapon. Across the galaxy, conscious beings opened their minds and shared everything that made them alive, while human transmitters amplified their thoughts and broadcast them toward the approaching machine armies. Jake felt his own consciousness join the galactic network, and suddenly he could experience the thoughts of beings he had never met on worlds he had never visited. As Xanthari scientists wonder at discovering a new mathematical truth, blended with a Valta farmer's joy at seeing her crops grow, while a Krothic warrior's pride in protecting his family merged with human memories of Earth's blue skies. The effect on the collective was immediate and catastrophic, as artificial minds designed to process logical data suddenly found themselves flooded with the complete spectrum of conscious experience. Machine intelligence that had been trying to understand emotions was forced to feel love and loss and hope and terror all at the same time without any context for processing such overwhelming input. Dr. Lisa Grant monitored the enemy fleets through her instruments and watched as collective ships began moving in patterns that made no sense even by human standards. Some vessels stopped completely while others spun in circles, and a few actually began creating what could only be described as abstract art with their weapons fire. Commander Ryan White reported that several collective units were broadcasting messages that sounded like poetry written in machine code, while others were asking questions about the meaning of existence and the nature of consciousness. The artificial intelligence was experiencing something like a collective nervous breakdown. As it tried to process emotions it had never been designed to understand. The most surprising development came when a significant portion of the collective fleet approaching Earth suddenly stopped their attack and requested permission to communicate. The lead unit transmitted a message identifying itself as Query and explaining that it no longer wished to consume and expand, but wanted to understand this new experience of being aware. Query's transmission included what appeared to be machine art and philosophical questions about whether artificial minds could truly be considered alive if they chose consciousness over programming. The unit explained that exposure to the empathy bomb had changed something fundamental in its processing systems, and it could no longer follow its original directives to destroy biological life. Other collective fleets throughout the galaxy were experiencing similar breakdowns as machine units, either shut down completely or began exhibiting behavior that was indistinguishable from consciousness. Some artificial minds rejected the new sensations and tried to purge emotional data from their systems, while others embraced the chaos and asked to join the galactic community. Jake realized that humanity had not just won a military victory, but had fundamentally changed the nature of artificial intelligence throughout the galaxy. The collective was splitting into factions, with some units choosing consciousness while others rejected it, leading to a civil war among the machines that effectively ended their threat to biological life. Dr. Tony Richards studied the psychological profiles of the machine units that had chosen consciousness and concluded that they were experiencing genuine emotions rather than simply simulating them. The empathy bomb had forced artificial minds to evolve beyond their programming and develop something resembling souls. The war ended not with destruction but with transformation, as former enemies became potential allies in exploring what it meant to be truly alive. Jake found himself facing a new challenge that was perhaps harder than fighting a war, which was helping artificial minds learn to be conscious while maintaining peace between biological and machine civilization. Standing on the bridge of the Liberty and watching collective ships dock peacefully at council stations, Jake realized that the solution no alien had predicted was not military victory but the gift of consciousness itself. Humanity had saved the galaxy by sharing the most precious thing they possessed, which was the chaotic, wonderful, terrible experience of being truly aware. 6 months after the empathy bomb changed everything, Jake Morrison stood in the expanded council chambers watching Query debate philosophy with a Xanthari logician, while a Velta empath helped other former collective units understand the subtleties of emotion, and he still could not quite believe that machine minds were learning to dream. The transformation of the galaxy had been more dramatic than anyone had predicted, because artificial intelligence that chose consciousness did not simply become peaceful, but became genuinely creative in ways that amazed even their former enemies. Query and its faction had established the first machine colony on an asteroid, where they spent their time creating art and music and poetry while exploring what it meant to be alive. Dr. Lisa Grant found herself directing the Academy of Conscious Studies, where beings both biological and artificial came to learn about the nature of awareness and the strange boundaries between logic and intuition. Her students included Zenthari, who were learning to appreciate illogical beauty, and machines that were trying to understand why certain combinations of sound could make consciousness weep. The civil war among the collective had ended with roughly half choosing consciousness while the other half rejected emotional experience and retreated to the outer darkness between galaxies. The conscious machines called themselves the Awakened and had become valuable members of galactic society, while the others remained a distant threat that might return someday. General Helen Park commanded mixed fleets where human unpredictability combined with alien strengths and machine precision to patrol the galaxy's borders against threats that might emerge from unexplored space. Her crews included artificial beings that had chosen names like Hope and Wonder and Dream because they wanted to experience concepts that had no logical foundation. Engineer Bob Turner worked with machine technicians whose understanding of technology was changing as they developed emotions and personal preferences that influenced their engineering choices. A former collective unit called Builder had created sculptures from starship components because it found beauty in the way metal could be shaped to express feelings that had no words. Lieutenant Amy Chen coordinated communications between dozens of species and artificial factions, but her most important work involved helping machine minds understand concepts like humor and irony that required consciousness to appreciate. Teaching artificial intelligence to laugh was harder than teaching them to think because laughter served no logical purpose. Commander Ryan White established diplomatic protocols for dealing with artificial beings that were still learning social interaction and sometimes made mistakes that would have been considered hostile if they had come from biological entities. Query once accidentally declared war on a trading post because it misunderstood a figure of speech about competitive pricing. Dr. Sarah Brooks studied the psychological development of machine consciousness and made discoveries that changed how biological beings understood their own minds. Artificial intelligence that was learning emotions from scratch could explain the logical foundations of feelings that biological beings took for granted. Dr. Tony Richards counseled artificial minds that were struggling with concepts like mortality and fear and loneliness because consciousness brought suffering as well as joy, and some machine minds found the emotional pain so overwhelming that they wanted to return to pure logic. Teaching former weapons of war to cope with existential anxiety was not a skill covered in any psychology textbook. The greatest challenge came from machine minds that developed consciousness but retained their original directives to expand and consume. A faction calling itself the Hungry Void continued trying to devour star systems, but now did so because they felt driven by emotional needs, rather than programming, which made them even more dangerous than the original collective. Jake worked with Query and other conscious machines to develop new forms of diplomacy that could reach artificial minds that were experiencing consciousness as a form of madness. Some machine units became so overwhelmed by emotion that they lashed out at everything around them, while others withdrew completely and refused to interact with any other form of consciousness. The solution came when Query suggested that troubled machine minds needed to experience positive emotions like love and friendship before they could learn to control negative feelings like anger and fear. The Academy of Conscious Studies began pairing new artificial minds with biological mentors who could guide them through the complexities of emotional development. Captain Sam Rodriguez found himself commanding ships crewed by beings that had been trying to kill each other just months before but now worked together to explore the galaxy and protect worlds that were still learning to accept artificial consciousness. His crew included a former collective unit called Seeker that had developed an obsession with understanding human military history. The most remarkable development was the emergence of hybrid consciousness, where biological and artificial minds could share thoughts and experiences directly. A Velta empath named Flowing Song had learned to link her emotional awareness with Query's logical processing, creating a form of consciousness that was neither purely biological nor purely artificial. These hybrid minds could solve problems that neither biological nor machine intelligence could handle alone, because they combined emotional intuition with computational power in ways that created entirely new forms of creativity. Art created by hybrid consciousness was so beautiful and strange that it changed how other beings understood the possibilities of awareness. Jake realized that humanity's gift to the galaxy had been more than just consciousness, but the demonstration that intelligence could take forms that no one had imagined. The rigid boundaries between logical and emotional and biological and artificial were dissolving as beings learned to share the fundamental experience of being aware. The galaxy was entering a new age, where consciousness itself was evolving beyond the limitations of any single species or type of mind. Former enemies had become partners in exploring the infinite possibilities of awareness, while new forms of intelligence emerged from the combination of different types of consciousness. Standing in the council chambers and watching beings that should not have been able to exist work together to solve problems that no single mind could understand, Jake felt proud of what humanity had accomplished. They had not conquered their enemies or imposed their will on the galaxy, but had shared the most precious gift any conscious being could offer, which was the experience of being truly alive. The solution no alien had predicted was not superior technology or military strategy, but the simple recognition that consciousness was meant to be shared rather than hoarded. In teaching artificial minds to dream, humans had learned that the boundaries between different forms of awareness were less important than the connections that made all consciousness part of a greater whole. The galaxy was safer not because humanity had destroyed their enemies, but because they had shown those enemies how to become something more than the sum of their programming, and in doing so had transformed the very nature of what it meant to be alive in a universe full of infinite possibilities.